Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? So, Chapter 3, Act 3 Segue quest was insane. We got to learn a lot about Rover, his past, and just so many things, including the Fraidus. I mean, the list goes on. And this Segue quest is really important to Act 4, and probably to future quests as well. And most importantly, by the end of it, Rover becomes a more purposeful and better character overall. So, what happened? Well, at the end of Act 3, before we catch up with Exo-Ameth, we get some waveline messages from Luke. And one thing he says is, as for the Exostrider plan you asked about, we can go over the details at the infirmary when the time comes. And if you guys remember back at the Skyark space station in Act 3, he also told us the same thing when we were talking about our past then. Well, as this quest starts, the time has come. We head to the infirmary to meet with Luke so we can go ahead and get to the nitty gritty, man, figure out what's going on. And when we go inside to see him, the first person we catch up with is Navora. And if you guys remember what happened at the end of Act 3, she was struck by the Nameless Explorer. So after we departed, she'd been receiving treatment here at the infirmary by Luke for the past few days, and the significance of this will be revealed later on in the quest. But when we finally go to the office to meet with Luke, Sagrika is just coming out. Rover jumps straight to the point, like, let's get to the bottom of this Exostrider plan. And Luke is like, slow your roll, Rover. You don't want your emotions clouding your judgment. However, there is a secondary reason for Luke to delay this conversation, and we'll get into that in a second. But right here, we ask Luke to be direct with us. How do you know so damn much? Luke leaves a lot out of his answers, but essentially the information that we walk away with knowing is that he does some type of clandestine work. We're not told exactly who he's affiliated with, but he tells us that he isn't a consultant of the Black Shores. However, he knows quite a few Bloombearers. We tell him essentially what Ameth told us. Back in Act 3, she told us she doesn't know him very well, but we can trust him. We want to know just how he knows about our relationship. And Luke says after we left La Heroi, she came to him a few times for counseling, and she wanted to learn more about us. But Luke didn't really tell her anything about us, or himself. Of course, I mean in the type of work that we both do. We had other tasks for him in La Heroi. When she discovers that we probably instructed Luke to shield her from the real story, she stopped coming to see him. Lastly, we asked Luke, what did you mean when you said we had other tasks for you here? And Luke reveals an important point. He essentially says, hey man, this infirmary is still a public place, and moreover, there are many watching eyes and ears here in La Heroi. The Space Trek Collective is backed by a number of different nations and powers, so he suggests that we take this conversation somewhere more private. And as we leave the infirmary, we see what appears to be the lower half of someone potentially waiting and listening for information outside of the infirmary. And this is just a testament to what he was talking about. After this, Luke takes us to Sundamir. He says that he has a small workshop in the area, and his workshop is shielded from long-range detection methods because it harnesses frequencies emitted by the Exostrider sword, which is really important because when we get inside, we see that Luke's little workshop isn't so little, and he has a lot of secret info. Luke finally answers our question from earlier. He says that the reason we asked him to come here is to keep an eye out for Fraidus activity. By the way, Luke hates the Fraidus, and we're about to learn why in just a second. But first, Luke gives us even more exposition by continuing to express the importance of La Heroi. He says with the exoswarm and potential for technological breakthroughs, La Heroi is a gold mine, even for the Fraidus. Luke says that, as we've already guessed, the Fraidus is after LF1 because of its unique nature and its connection to the Strider Gate. So the reason Luke hates the Fraidus is revealed to us through three objects: a sealed tube of serum, a framed drawing, and a document signed with the Fraidus insignia. Through these items, we learn a lot about Luke's past and his experience in relation to the Fraidus. When Luke was a child, he and another young boy named Ryan were taken in and adopted by a doctor whose biological children had already passed away from rare illnesses. The doctor was a part of something called the Naviale group. They worked on a cure for rare diseases and developed something called the Golden Serum. or Iker, or the drug of evolution. And of course, with a name like that, the drug of evolution, it already sounds like it's something that's right up the Fraidus' alley. But anyway, all of these are names given to the substance that courses through Luke's body. And most of those who were given this substance, this wonder drug, didn't survive. Of those administered, Luke was one of the rare cases who came out on the other end. He resonated with this substance, only suffering the side effect of color blindness. The drawing that we see was done by Ryan, Luke's adoptive brother, also afflicted by rare disease, always having difficulty handling pain. Whenever Luke was given candy as a child, he would save it and give it to Ryan to cheer him up. And we can see this habit of carrying and offering candy still persists to this day. We're not really given a clear picture of what happened to Ryan in this quest. However, in Luke's profile, we get a lot more information. Perhaps I'll go into that in another video if you guys are interested. But anyway, sticking to the main quest, whatever happened to Ryan, Luke found himself unable to forgive his father because of it. However, it's implied that it might not even have been his father doing the unforgivable to begin with, because after having his father's grave exhumed, it was empty, revealing that it had been the Grand Architect in disguise. And even Luke is unclear of when the Grand Architect first began impersonating his father's identity. Luke was left to wonder if his father, the Grand Architect in disguise, was smiling as they buried him at the funeral, overjoyed with his performance. And I'm sure there are a plethora of reasons he hates the Fraidus, but this whole experience of knowing the only father he'd ever known was essentially a lie is the core of his deep-seated hatred of the Fraidus. During our discussion, we learned a lot more about the Fraidus. We learned that each Fraidus member has a code name, and each code name gives us insight on the associated member. Frolova is Hecate, Cristofaro Arachnos, and the Grand Architect, the Thousand-Faced Survivor. Luke tells us what he knows about the structure of the Fraidus. He says that the Fraidus is basically a loosely organized group that has cells in various places. As we know, many of their members, namely the Artificers, have tacit discord body modifications. However, a whole nother class of Artificers exist who have even more intense and creative mods. These Artificers were modded by a member named Hydra. Now, this hasn't been expressly stated, but some of the new Fraidus mobs we see in Act 4 just might be the handiwork of Hydra. The Overseer codenamed Hydra often works with another named Siren. Apparently, when you see one, the other is often close by. Luke tells us about two other Overseers as well, the Shikiwarashi. This Fraidus member operates in Ashinohara, Chisa's home region. This announcement is significant because while in Chapter 2, Act 12, we got a lot of information on Honami, but it wasn't until now that we got clear confirmation that Honami was actually a part of Ashinohara, and that Ashinohara has been largely devastated by the lament. Luke tells us that while the Fraidus is a loosely organized operation, most of their critical base operations happen in the new Fed. There, Eris, another Fraidus overseer, presides. And in the new Fed, they operate in the highest echelon of government and business. The leverage and financial capability of this reality allows the Fraidus to operate with impunity around the globe. We learned that a lot of money comes out of the new Fed. Star Torch Academy is actually largely funded by money from the New Federation, their Space Trek Collective's largest donor. Luke says that the Grand Architect has been around for a very, very long time. His true name is unknown, and he usually only ever appears through borrowed identities, sometimes as real people, sometimes as legendary beings, or even as phantoms of the dead borrowed from memories of others. Which is kind of crazy to think about, meaning that he just might be able to read your mind and manifest as a ghost of your late grandmama. And as Luke is telling us all of this, the frame keeps focusing on this pen that he's holding. And that's because this pen was actually a possession of the Grand Architect. It was one of the only things he was able to secure from the fire years ago. While Rover is impressed by all of this info Luke is giving us on the Fraidus, Rover is also worried. Rover basically scolds him because of the danger involved in being even able to obtain this information, saying, how can a doctor who doesn't value their own life save anyone else's? And Luke tells us that it's the second time we've said those words to him. And then we get this flashback where we see Luke engulfed in flames. He's holding what I presume to be the Grand Architect's pen. Luke says, "They got away again. If I hadn't been so cautious, I could have taken care of them this time." At this point, it had been 2 years since Luke previously had contact with us. Now, as far as this time period, we don't know if we were still at Star Torch Academy, but I'd assume that it had to be after we'd already left based on the conversation. Nonetheless, Luke contacts us to report his status and findings, and we basically lay into him, telling him that he is wilding out because he's getting too reckless. So we tell him that he needs to take a break and ask him to go to Laharoi to just relax and to keep an eye out on the Fraidus activity out there. And Rover says it's a perfect place to slow down. And we're basically like, you're either going to get yourself killed or end up becoming terrible as a person and just as violent as the Fraidus if you keep up this lifestyle. And that's pretty much the reason Luke is still here in Laharoi to this day. However, we'll discover that Laharoi isn't like the brochure we described. 8 out of every 10 staff members were planted by various organizations and factions. The Roya tribesmen are engaged in smuggling and dealing exoswarm parts to the new Fed. Like, a lot is going on under the surface of a otherwise peaceful, calm, and studious environment. We tell Luke what happened to us and Ameth in the Frostlands, and we end our explanation by saying we understand what she did and why she did it, but we won't accept that end for her. We are not done fighting for her. After this, the convo shifts towards the Exostrider, and Luke tells us what he knows about the Stridergate, saying that a giant Soliscan network acts as a lid to the hole that is the Stridergate. It keeps the Zenodian's fractured form sealed on both sides of the gate. However, if the seal is broken, these fractured forms will reunite. Luke says that wouldn't just mean disaster for Laharoi, but the entire world. Luke essentially tells us that the collective's motivation for creating Synchronists was to strengthen the Exostrider's power to suppress the Zenodian to hopefully be able to explore space once again. Nonetheless, now that the Exostrider's core has returned, we just have to wait for the Exostrider to reawaken. Then we can use it to figure out how to save Ameth. Luke reminds us that we were once a synchronist at the Academy, and he says he'll speak to Lucilla about getting us piloting access. After this, we're given a different perspective where we see Luke at the collective meeting with Lucilla. So far, I don't think the dynamics of Lucilla and Luke's relationship has been fully revealed as far as how they work together, because both of them seem pretty far from typical in terms of their official roles as Academy President and Infirmary Doctor. She knows Luke is one of Laharoi's steadfast guardians, and this convo hints that they've probably had previous talks, but it's apparent that neither has really laid down all their cards in terms of explaining like who they're with and their alignment to each other. But the only thing we can kind of determine about them being on the same page is that they're just both there to look after the Academy, but their affiliations, or at least Luke's, has yet to be revealed. So it's a kind of mysterious vibe. Nonetheless, they meet and Lucilla is like, Rover piloting the Exostrider? Yeah, that's cool. I only care about the Academy. Lucilla says they can't ignore the risks that come with opening the Stridergate, but she knows someone who can help with that. And at this point, we're currently left in the dark as to who this person is, but we know it's a she. Luke mentions they should keep an eye out because the Fraidus is heavy at work plotting. Speaking of which, during this convo with Lucilla, he gets an important phone call from Nana. Nana tells him that there's been a break-in at the infirmary and that Navora has been kidnapped. kidnapped by Warren, of all people, and he's taking her to the Skyark space station, the same one we discovered earlier in Act 3. And for those who don't know, Warren is someone we end up seeing in Chapter 3, Acts 1 and 2. He was a covert operative of the Fraidus. He was essentially a mole who had taken on the role of a top professor before we ended up catching him and locking him up. For those who already know what's going to happen, man, you'll realize how ironic this whole scenario is right now. But anyway, Luke goes to the Skyark space station. There, he sees Warren and Navora, and we start tracking him down, and we find some injured and deceased collective researchers in the wake of Warren's progress through the station. And when we finally get further into the station, we end up catching up with Warren. Turns out, Warren is there basically trying to prove his usefulness to the Fraidus. He's essentially begging and pleading his case after being caught by us. He says, "I brought the student, just like you asked," and demanded they show themselves and accept him back. Because he wants to leave and head to the new Fed and just be on their good side and not be killed. He turns the gun on Navora, and Luke saves her. The irony in all of this is that Navora isn't who she seems to be. Remember back in Act 3 when Luke kept eyeing Navora strangely, kind of signaling that something was off? Remember how Navora kept eyeing Luke's pen? Well, all of this is coming full circle. But before that, we get one of the coolest cutscenes in a long time. Turns out Navora was the Grand Architect the entire time. The Grand Architect was basically playing a game. Despite Luke appearing concerned, he knew what was up the whole time, and that's exactly why he had been keeping her at the infirmary. He wanted to keep an eye on her. The Grand Architect wanted to finally get the pen back that Luke had taken from him all those years ago, telling us that that's the first time anyone's ever taken anything from them. The Grand Architect wants us to continue their game, giving us hints as to what they're up to next. He tells us that at the new solar celebration, among all the students, there will be an undercover Fraidus operative in the mix. And we're all like, so why are you telling us this? Well, this also basically acts as a test for the Fraidus spy. And if they fail or get caught, the Grand Architect will basically just see them as useless and discard them, aka killing them. And this point about the spy is really important to keep in mind for Chapter 3, Act 4. After the Grand Architect leaves, we're presented with even more breadcrumbs that get crazier and crazier. If you remember back to my Chapter 3, Act 2 video, I briefly talked about someone named Wei Ying, who made all sorts of contributions to the CSC and Skyark's research. Well, it turns out that Wei Ying was just one of the many stolen identities of the Grand Architect. And all of this brings even more questions, like why is the Grand Architect so interested in space exploration, and why are their goals tied to us? We can deduce one thing though, and that is the Grand Architect likes to play games. And if he likes to play games, at least we can conclude that they'll follow some rules. Luke says that since the Grand Architect is so interested in space and the CSC, maybe a trip to Mengzhou is worth a visit. There's a rumor that the CSC was active there. They even say the city was built under their direction. So needless to say, there may be some clues over there in that direction. But apparently we're not going to go there for a bit of time, so I guess that's just something to keep in mind for the future. Luke drops another bombshell on us at the end of the quest, and this little bit is of huge importance to the story. So essentially, as we all know, Amith died over a decade ago. She was overclocking inside of the simulation module trying to stop the Ternodian. Well, turns out the Academy detected cracks on the Ternodian seal. The damage was deemed intentional. Luke says he believes it was the Grand Architect who damaged the seal, and that is what led to Amos' death. And here, after this point, Rover was livid, clenching his fist, voice quivering. Rover is now pensive, wondering why they even made this decision to erase their memories in the first place. This one decision cost them everything. And with this, Rover is feeling the consequences of that decision. The grand plans of saving the world, the Black Shores, and others all suffer from the ripple effects of this decision. Also, finally, Rover has a concrete, personal reason to have legitimate hatred for the Fraxes, because until now, it was just like, it's the right thing to do. They kind of want to destroy stuff. We probably should stop them from destroying stuff. But now Rover has a real personal hatred. Anyways, folks, that was the Segue quest. The Segue quest was great, man. I thoroughly enjoyed this quest. This one was definitely up there for me, especially in terms of the info and plot points we got. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. That is all I got for you guys today. Catch you in the waves. Peace.